Welcome, happy Thursday. It's wonderful to see you all in the NSE room. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 923rd New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and today I have the huge pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation with Sean Kelly and Phyllis Tuchman. We are thrilled to welcome poet Marisa Crawford here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, a reminder of the legacies and dispossession of and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Gallerist Sean Kelly began his career in England as an artist before branching into work as a museum curator and director. After relocating to New York, he established his eponymous gallery in 1991. Under his stewardship, the gallery has become a symbol for high quality and thought-provoking contemporary art and conversation. He currently serves on the board of PEN America, where he is co-chair of the annual PEN Literary Gala. And our host today, critic and art historian Phyllis Tuchman, teaches and writes about art, particularly sculpture. She has taught at Williams College, Hunter College, and the School of Visual Arts, and we are so lucky to have her as an editor-at-large here at the Brooklyn Rail. With that, I'm thrilled to pass things over to you, Phyllis, to begin the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Sean, I'm fascinated that you began as an artist and as a curator, but then did you think that was what you would continue to do? Then you came to America, and how did you become a dealer?
Well, that's about 6 questions right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always thought I would be an artist. I was trained as an artist. I always thought I'd be an artist. And my favorite lecturer at college, when I graduated, as a young artist, the last thing you want to think of is that you would have anything to do with the smutty commercial world. But just after I graduated, my favorite lecturer, so we were sitting in a pub one day and he said to me, you're a pretty good artist, but you'd make a great art dealer. And I didn't speak to him for 4 years. I was so offended. But I went from being a practicing artist to becoming a curator. I was invited to take over curating an institution, a public institution in Britain. And I thought it would be an interesting challenge to do that. And then I became the interim museum director, which I was not interested in particularly, because even then being a museum director was a very difficult job, and it sort of distanced you from the artists, which is what I was interested in. But I'd come to America in 1976, and I really fell in love with how vibrant the culture here was, in a way that in Britain at that time it was not, and that the extraordinary kind of commitment that people made to the visual arts and collecting here. And I just sort of promised myself that I would one day come back to America and work in America, and specifically in New York. And it took me quite a long time to figure out how to do that. But by 1988, I came here. So, yeah.
Wow, and it was a very different art scene by then.
Yeah, hugely different. I mean, I'd been coming since the mid-70s, so I was aware of what was going on, but it was just a completely different world, yeah, as it is today.
And you must have been attracted to performance very early on.
I think, I'm very attracted to the mechanics of the thinking of art making and cultural involvement. whether it be with a writer or an artist. I'm very preoccupied with that process. And I suppose that my interest in the program really reflected that quite closely. I mean, we worked a lot of conceptual work and performance work, but particularly with a lot of women, more women than I think many other galleries, not because they were women, but because they were fantastic artists. And of course, you know, if you arrive in a town and you're trying to build a program and open your own space, you can't hoover up all the artists you'd love because many of them will already be represented. So it was fairly natural to start working with a lot of women because they were underrepresented. But yeah, I think my personal interests veer very much towards the conceptual and the kind of intellectual process of thinking and making.
And who were some of the artists you first showed?
You know, many of the artists that we're still working with. So Marina Abramovich, Joseph Kasuth, Rebecca Horn, Julio Sarmento, sadly no more. Yeah, but a wide range of artists.
Wow, that's pretty astonishing. But you do have an amazing group of women that you show, and
you know,
sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think that there's no question that historically lots of different groups within the visual arts community have been underrepresented, but I think, you know, women are significantly underrepresented, still are, but were for a very, very long period of time. And I just found that they had a sort of natural intelligence about the way that they worked that was very comfortable for me, and I could relate to significantly. And those are some of the most long-standing relationships that the gallery has.
Wow, can we go back a little bit? Because I want to ask Sean about real estate. I'm kind of intrigued. I always thought that exit art was, I mean, to me, exit art, you saw it on your left when you were trying to go to the Lincoln Tunnel. And it just seemed to me, it was in the middle of nowhere. And somehow when you took over this space, you're no longer in the middle of nowhere. You're absolutely rooted in Hudson Yards. And Hudson Yards as a place to go to restaurants. Hudson Yards is a place to live. Hudson Yards is a place to shop. I mean, how did you end up taking this space and Hudson Yards happened?
Well, you know, when we first opened a public space, we opened 2,000 square feet on Mercer Street. And then when we moved to Chelsea, we moved to 12,000 square feet on 29th Street. And when it was clear that that lease was up and that Chelsea was changing profoundly, of course, the art world is always looking for where to go next. And at that point, it was running out of nexts. I mean, there were just not that many places to go. You know, I certainly didn't want to go off Manhattan. So moving north, you know, it was only 5 blocks north, 6 blocks north, but moving north into what was then Hell's Kitchen seemed like an interesting opportunity because it was a pretty rough and tumble area. But then what really decided it was that exit art, for, you know, quite tragic reasons, exit art came to an end because one of the founders passed away and the space was available. And it's the space, basically. I mean, you know, we have 22,000 square feet on 2 floors with 16-foot ceilings. That was a foundation, effectively. And the opportunities for the artists were just limitless and exponential. And so it was about the space. And then we've always worked with Toshiko Mori, who's a great architect. And Toshiko was involved in the sort of overall planning, pre-planning for the Hudson Yards area, and was involved in the canopies for the number 7 train line that was coming to the area. So we knew that something was going to happen and that it was going to be significant. But we didn't know it was going to be what it's become. And in addition to all the things you've mentioned, we're obviously, 2 blocks from the shed where Freeze takes place, and a block from where the Armory now takes place. So we ended up right in the epicenter of at least one aspect of the New York art world, which was fortuitous. Of course, I'd love you to ascribe foresight to me and great planning, but there's a lot of luck involved.
Yeah, I know, but I'm a deep believer in one makes their luck.
So am I.
Okay. And this is an astonishing space.
Yeah, I think it's quite unique. We do have 11,000 square feet per floor, over 2 floors, with a lot of infrastructure that a lot of other galleries just don't have access to, which enable us to do shows that have a versatility and a kind of a unique architectural aspect, I guess.
Well, that's what's so amazing, because we're starting with these images of Marina's performance when she lived in the gallery, and it's absolutely astonishing that she was able to build this, and people were able to attend.
Yeah, I mean, we've always built our spaces rather more like theatres, in the sense that you can get into the back of all the walls. I've never quite understood why galleries build out full to the walls, because access to the back of the walls is really sort of important, I think. So it gives us a great deal of flexibility. For instance, with Marina's installation, we had to bring in, we had to, the shower had to work, the toilet had to work, the sink had to work. So we were able to put plumbing in the back of the walls, and literally plumber into water and the sewer system, to enable her to live in the space for 12 days.
And she was the program The Affair, that I just remember, I think it was an HBO show that came to Marina's exhibition.
No, it was funny because it was Sex in the City.
Oh my God, it's even bigger.
And what happened was that the producers and the writers had come to see the piece, and they wanted to include it in Sex in the City. And of course, being an elitist highbrow snob, I said, well, no, we're not doing that. And my daughter at the time said, oh my God, that's huge, you have to do that. So it's my daughter that convinced us to do it. And it was interesting because it's the episode in which one of the characters meets Mikhail Baryshnikov. And Mikhail became a friend, and we got to know those guys. And we've ended up a block away from his wonderful performing arts space in Hell's Kitchen, and have done events for him subsequently. But what was fascinating to me about it, honestly, Phyllis, was here you have one of the most esoteric performance works that had been made in New York or anywhere in the world, I think, to that point. A very challenging conceptual work that Marina made soon after 9/11. It was very much a gift to New York in response to the attacks on New York. And you have this very sort of highbrow art world event that becomes a phenomenon, and then transcends that and moves into popular culture within months. And I was fascinated by how that could happen, and thought a lot about Kurt Varnado, the great curator from MoMA, who is a friend, who always championed high and low at the same time. And I thought this is really a manifestation of how performance work can be high and low. Not, I don't mean low in a pejorative sense, but can be high and popular at the same time. And so it was really fascinating to be part of that, and to watch it evolve from being this sort of rarefied event in an art gallery to becoming something that existed in a different way for millions of people.
Absolutely. And somehow, I mean, you've known Marina's work for so long. Are you tempted to write about it because you've seen so many manifestations of it?
That's an interesting question. I really, yeah, the simple answer is yes, because in fact, we were working on a curatorial project where I was going to, very generously, the institution was allowing me to revert to a previous existence and curate the exhibition and write about it. And we'll see if that comes to pass. I mean, of course, it's complicated as her dealer for so long to reverse those polarities. But on a certain level, when I moved from the public sector to the private sector, there was nobody doing that. Subsequently, many people have done that. So I'm always interested in sort of transgressing those boundaries. And I don't see why, as a dealer who had a previous incarnation as a curator, I shouldn't be allowed to pop back over the fence occasionally. So maybe that will happen. We'll see.
Wow. One of the things that impresses me about your group of artists is that so many of them come from other countries. Marina is one example. And the irony of Kehinde is I now think of him as an African, as half African.
Well, he is half African. I mean, his father was from Nigeria, and he was brought up in LA, but he's now doing extraordinary things for Africa with his program in Senegal with BlackRock, his residency program, and he's building a new residency program in Nigeria and has further plans as well. So, I think he's a perfect example of, we're all sort of international citizens, and we all have a responsibility to contribute. And Kehinde's what he's doing in Senegal with BlackRock, and will do in Nigeria with the second iteration of BlackRock, is changing the landscape in Africa for a whole generation of young artists. It's remarkable.
And I thought the article in the New York Times about his now can we go back to Times Square? I thought the article in the Times about his portraits of African leaders was astonishing.
Yeah. I mean, that show's currently up in Paris. I think Kehinde, does not get enough credit for the extraordinary activism that he is involved in, both in lifting whole communities up, but also in very subtly critiquing the seats of power worldwide that affect us all. And he's for me, Kehinde is a conceptual artist in many respects, and I think his practice is very conceptually orientated. Of course, people think about the paintings, they think about the Obama portrait, but it's so much richer than that. It's so much more than that.
And how I mean, this sculpture was made for the museum in Richmond. How did it end up in Times Square for a short time?
Well, actually, this sculpture was not made for Richmond. It was made in response to the Confederate monuments in Richmond. And Kehinde went down to Richmond to talk about making an exhibition, and was so moved by the sight of museum of the mile of these
Thomas
Confederate,
Avenue.
yeah,
Yeah.
and was really upset by them and wanted to address that. And we looked into doing this. This is a monumental sculpture. It's over 30 feet tall. And what happened was we funded this because nobody stepped forward. So we funded this project entirely, and we were intending for it to go to Richmond as part of his exhibition, as part of an exhibition. And we got the invitation for it to go to Times Square. So it went to Times Square first, and then it went to Richmond. By the time the project had come to fruition and it had gone to Richmond, all but one of the Confederate monuments had been taken down. So the great irony here is that there is only one remaining Confederate sculpture on Monument Mile, but Kehinde's sculpture, Rumors of War, which is a little bit taller than the Confederate monument, quite deliberately, is now there as a permanent work. So I think that speaks very eloquently to how our times have changed, how timely Kehinde's intervention was. And we're talking about a period of about 4 years from start to finish. And at the end of that 4 years, everything had changed in terms of people's willingness to tolerate those monuments to oppression and racism.
And now when we go forward to the last show that Kehinde had with you, had he begun the sculpture before or after President Obama's portrait? And I am curious, you must have been astonished how people turned out to see President Obama's portrait.
Yeah, it's we were talking about making one's own luck earlier. I mean, I would love to claim that we knew all these things were going to happen. One, of course, travels in the hope that they will, and one plans projects that one hopes have that kind of impact. But a lot of it is serendipity and timing. With the Obama portrait, honestly, I think that it was such a collaborative conversation between President Obama and Kehinde. And Kehinde so profoundly responded to the context of our first Black president that he produced this iconic work that was deeply, deeply moving to people. No presidential portrait has ever had a response like that during its own lifetime, and had the sort of attention and visitorship that his and Amy Sherrod's portrait of Michelle Obama got. So, again, timing is very important, but I do think that Kehinde's sense of the zeitgeist of the moment was absolutely so precise, and has become iconic for the beginning of a conversation about a different conversation about race and equity in America.
I'm kind of intrigued by the backgrounds of his paintings. The floral aspects, the decorative aspects, they're very serious. They have this element that isn't.
Well, actually, the backgrounds are the key in many respects to these paintings. I mean, both with Obama and with this group of work that we just recently showed, which are the Cuban performers, because all of the backgrounds are taken from indigenous native plants from the regions where these people are from, and reference cultural phenomena. In many respects, the the foliage and the plants in the backs of these Cuban portraits are related not just to food and culture and the culture of food, but also to ritual, religious ritual within those communities. So they are, I mean, if you commit the time to understand and read the paintings, they are freighted with a great deal of cultural significance and information.
And did you show him right away, Candy?
No, he was working with another dealer, and that that didn't continue. And when he left them, I know there was a great number of people who were interested in working with Kehinde, as we were. And I think at that time, a lot of people probably were curious about that choice for us, because I'm not sure they could see how that fit our program. But it's perfect for our program for two reasons. One is that I believe that, as I've said, that Kehinde is essentially an artist working with a very powerful conceptual framework that has a strong social and cultural imperative. And that's something that we're very committed to and interested in. And secondly, we had nobody like him in the program. Now, we're not a gallery that wants 15 Marina Abramoviches, because there aren't 15 Marina Abramoviches, there's only one. We want that one. There aren't 15 Kehinde Wileys, there's only Kehinde Wiley, and we wanted that one. And when we met and talked about working with him, I only talked to him about the conceptual aspect of the work. And I hope that was part of his decision making.
Well, he's a smart cookie, because I would show with you. Of course, I don't make art.
Can I see your portfolio?
No, I make no art, so I only know how to write. And I'm intrigued that he showed a film.
Yeah, the film is Kehinde's consistently made films about his projects. There are probably now at least half a dozen. They're an important part of his practice. They are a point of access into understanding the work and the context for the work. And it's something that he's done very consistently for 20 years.
Wow. I think the next one, let's see what the next, okay. We're gonna jump to Shazia. Well, another example of an artist from a different culture who has absolutely educated us about other countries and culture.
I think she's educating us about America, actually, too. I do think that for me, obviously, I'm originally British, but it's an incredible privilege to be an outsider. It's an incredible privilege to be an immigrant in a culture and to be able to see the culture in a different way, in hopefully a very clear-eyed way, and to have these other cultural references. I mean, Shazia is an incredible artist. She is, born in Pakistan, educated as a tradition in the traditional miniature technique, became the first woman to ever teach at the School of Traditional Miniature Painting in Pakistan in Lahore, moved to America, got scholarships, which had a huge impact on her practice, becomes a MacArthur winner, MacArthur Genius Award winner, and is an extraordinary artist, an extraordinary thinker, an extraordinarily smart beacon for us, I think. And as much as I think that she's educating us about some of the traditions of her culture, I think she's really taking a long, hard look at America and educating us about what it means to be a citizen of America in the 21st century. And she's literally a genius. She is extraordinary to work with, quite brilliant.
Well, I feel the same way that you do. And when she began to make sculpture, I mean, that was unbelievable. And these videos are astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think for many people, perhaps who haven't paid as much attention as they should be doing, because she, for me, is one of the most important artists alive. You have somebody who, you know, as a woman coming out of a fairly repressive environment, breaking all these boundaries, as a, you know, as a Muslim woman, breaking all these boundaries in a very phallocentric world, becoming a first in so many ways, to be able to expand from the scale of a miniature to making video, to making animation that animates entire rooms or entire cities, and we've done that in Times Square, to making monumental sculpture, to making monumental paintings, moving into mosaic. Yesterday at Johns Hopkins in Washington, D.C., opening an enormous 90-foot long mural as a mosaic. You know, she's just pushing the boundaries of her practice and technology and culture so far all the time. It's just so impressive.
Well, I love this image because when I wrote about her work, it was winter and I didn't sit on a park bench as long as I ordinarily would. And then when the weather got warmer, I sat and I stared at this particular detail and the way the light hits it. She's like a born sculptor.
Yeah. Yeah, and what, you know, there are other, you know, remarkable things about this. I mean, the subject matter for this sculpture, it comes from a small drawing that she made 20 years before, that she revisited for the subject matter of this sculpture, of the rooted woman, this woman who is effectively a migrant and homeless and moves through the world. And if we could see her feet, you can see her feet morph into roots, which are sort of, so she can transport herself and ground herself in the world. And she also becomes this icon of this kind of goddess form. But if you look closely, you can see a reference to Ruth Bader Ginsburg's collar, because this sculpture was being conceived and made just after Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course, a paragon of the law and progress for women had just passed away. So as a nod to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Shazia includes one of her famous collars on the sculpture. And this was a project that came out of a conversation with the justices at the appellate court, because there was a sculpture put on top of, for the first time ever, a sculpture put on top of one of the court buildings in New York. And the interesting thing about that was, which is just by Madison Square Park, the interesting thing about that was that all the other sculptures on the roof are men. And there was an empty plinth because the Muslim community had lobbied, I think in the 50s, there was a sculpture of Muhammad, and they didn't feel it was appropriate. Muhammad, as a historical lawgiver, should be depicted on top of this court. So it was actually the Muslim community that lobbied for that to be taken down. So there was an empty plinth. And when Shazia found out about this, she thought, well, how much better to fill that plinth than to put a woman up there?
Right.
That's what she did.
But also this sculpture that was in Madison Square Park. I mean, that's one of the things that always intrigues me about Madison Square Park. One of the greatest sculptors in American history, Augustus St. Gaudens, has his monument to Farragut nearby. And she was able to exist with this absolutely astonishing statue.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the history of, there was a very interesting article I think last week in the New York Times about a group of French brothers who came here and, you know, made some of the most iconic sculptures in New York that we all know, but probably none of us knew who those sculptors were, because they were jobbing sculptors. I think it was 5 brothers, and they were jobbing sculptors. Well, we live in a different culture now, and the culture is very, you know, it's very sort of icon based. So we're very interested in the personality of the artists to some extent, being explained to us. But one of the things I think about Shazia that's really remarkable is that she manages to find equivalencies for those great public monuments that sort of stand in as every woman or every man for all of us. But they're pretty timeless. I mean, I think that's the secret. They're quite iconic and timeless. They're not rooted in the moment. They're not topical or polemic in that sense, but they are freighted with a lot of cultural and political, with a small p, information. So I think that, you know, they are relevant and they're powerful and people can read into them a very great deal. But there's no correct reading, as it were. And I think that's what allows them to have such power and stay in power.
Exactly. And I think our next sequence are the Times Square.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have the most astonishing shots of it.
Yeah, at some point, I hope somebody's going to ask me whether I'm a gallerist or I'm making public sculpture here. I'm getting rid, like seeing these things in sequence. I'm starting to think, I wonder how we pay for all these things. Anyway, yeah, this was an amazing project, and it shows Shazia's breadth, because she was invited to do the Midnight Moment in Times Square, where, you know, virtually all the screens are dedicated to a single artist. And this is this beautiful animation that she made in collaboration with a couple of other, a musician and a singer who she's worked with a lot, that really deals with this meeting of cultures in a very profound way, and they're passing through space and time. And we were able to show it on this absolutely monumental platform, which was very exciting.
Well, and I also think that this is the abstract element of her art, where she goes from figurative to abstract.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, you know, there are 2 figures basically battling in space, falling through time and space in the center of this image, that become sort of almost consumed by an increasing abstraction. And that sort of elegiac, iconic battle that's occurring starts to morph into being a cultural dance. And it has all these other cultural references. But as it continues, it becomes more and more abstracted.
I think everyone will just look at the images, and everyone should just enjoy them. I particularly love this detail of the dancing branch.
You know, the most unnerving thing about this is you have this incredible aesthetic moment, and literally people stop and Times Square went quiet. I mean, if you can imagine that, and then you look up and you have this aesthetic moment, and then 90 seconds later, when the piece is over, you're standing staring at a, you know, giant billboard for Victoria's Secret or something. I mean, it is quite unnerving, it's quite jarring, but it's also a wonderful opportunity because you're given this platform that no artist could afford. It's a great privilege. to be able to present the work like this, and on an absolute one-to-one basis with a lot of contemporary advertising, which is, you know, how we receive a lot of information. So it's really quite fantastic that artists are given this opportunity.
John, I was kind of astonished when we started looking at the images. So here's Kahende, who showed his sculpture in Times Square, and here we have Shazia showing her video. Do you have some magic access to Times Square?
No, I mean, we could have shown Sam Moyer's beautiful project at the entrance to Central Park. I mean, we could have shown AWOL's intervention on AWOL rsquo's intervention on billboards all over New York. No, we don't have a lock on Times Square. I'd love to say we did, but we don't. But you know, we do have a good relationship with the powers that be there, and have collaborated very happily with them. But we do work with a lot of artists who are very active in real social space and enjoy taking on the opportunity to address an audience in a different way in real social space, whether it be Central Park, Times Square, billboards, LED screens, whatever. So it's something, you know, these are opportunities we're always interested in looking for.
Well, and I love that these are the three artists who we've been looking at in great detail. Is the next one James Joyce? Okay, so Sean, you're this astonishing collector of, you were this astonishing collector of James Joyce. How did that happen? You're a dealer.
Well, you know, dealers are real people too, Phyllis. You know, I think perhaps it's a little overlooked that dealers are collectors too. You know, most of us are people who are very passionate about what we do. My family, you know, my grandfather was Irish. There's a very strong Irish connection. I first picked up Ulysses when I was about 13 and a half.
Wow.
I had heard that it was this very complicated, difficult book. And, you know, everybody knows that there's some naughty bits in it, but that wasn't, I don't think that was the reason I picked it up. And I wanted this intellectual challenge. I mean, I was reading a lot of literature at that time and continue to, that was quite challenging. And I read it in a very innocent way. And I thought, well, this is just an extraordinary book. I don't understand it. And it's a book I returned to many, many, many times. I've read it 11 times now in my life. And when I had the opportunity to, there's also another key to this, which is that I was born on the 16th of June, which is the day that Ulysses is set on.
Oh my God.
So I felt that there were all these kind of cultural markers in my personal life that related to, you know, Joyce was an expatriate Irishman, my family were expatriates, etc. I moved to America. I felt there were all these kind of confluences, and it was fascinating for me. So it's something I read a lot and I was very deeply invested in. But, you know, Penguin Modern Classic version, you know, 2 and 6 or whatever at the time. When I first had the wherewithal to consider even owning something of Joyce's that was more special, I bought a first edition of Ulysses, and the dealer who sold it to me let me pay it off over a period of time very generously. And it started a 25-year obsession.
Wow.
So we amassed this collection of Joyce material over 25 years. And a friend of mine who's a brilliant writer and dealer came to the house one day and was looking at this material and came down looking from, it was up in our library, it came down looking rather shell-shocked. And I thought he'd discovered a bunch of fakes or something. And he sat down, we opened a bottle of wine, and I said to him, Rick, what's the problem? He goes, my God, he said, this is the most important collection of Joyce in private hands. What are you going to do with it? And it was the first moment at which I realized that there was an incredible responsibility here in this collection, and that it really belonged in the public sphere. It was nice to have it in one's own environment, but it really had grown to the point where it should be shared. And so my wife, Mary, and I, our first thoughts were, what should we do? And we both love the Morgan Library. And we approached the Morgan and said, would they have any interest in this collection? And as it turned out, Colin Bailey, the director, and the previous curator, who's now at the New York Public Library, Declan Kiley, were both super excited about it. And they had quite good Eliot, and they had quite good, just gone completely blank, but it'll come back in a minute.
Virginia Woolf. You said Virginia Woolf.
Virginia Woolf. And so they were very excited about the possibility of the collection going to the Morgan. And that's what happened. And then they were committed through their curators. Sheila Bevan and her colleagues made this incredible exhibition based on the collection that borrowed from a number of other sources as well. And a beautiful book was produced. And it was the 100th anniversary of publication of Ulysses in 1922. So it was fortuitous timing.
And are you interested in the different interpretations of James Joyce? Do you keep track of that, or you're just interested in reading it on your own?
I'm not somebody who joins readings and associations, or I'm not a member of the Joyce Society or anything of that sort. I think it's a very private pastime for me. I was fascinated by the fact that there was this moment in 1922 where, these three great pillars of modernism were all published at the same time that sort of changed the landscape for literature. That to me was really, really, really interesting. I got very involved with that as a topic. But I suppose that I'm attracted to, in particular, my two great heroes in the literary world and in the visual arts world are Joyce and Marcel Duchamp. And I think that they have a lot of things in common. They have changed how we think. They also had wicked senses of humor, which I hope I have too. And they've changed language and landscape for us profoundly. And they're two of the great intellectuals of the 20th century. And they are just an unending source of fascination for me. So we have two major collections, Duchamp and Joyce. And Mary and I sort of made a decision that that one of these collections should go to a public institution. And that was the Joyce material. And we were thrilled that it went to the Morgan. It could not have gone anywhere better. The Morgan is just extraordinary. And the Duchamp material remains in the family. And we're planning, I can see somebody on your screen that's going to enjoy this comment. Donald's there. We're planning a crazy project with it at the moment, which it'll become visible for the first time. So that will remain in the family, and then it's not my problem. My kids will decide what they want to do with that in due course. But Marcel and Joyce are constant preoccupations for me, and I think I'm engaged in thinking about them every day, literally, and they influence pretty much everything I do.
And do you own objects by Duchamp or just works on paper?
Both.
Wow, that must be amazing.
66 and counting.
Holy moly! When I was in high school, they had the recreation of the Armory show in New York. And I mean, that was just mind-bending.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah, I was very, very lucky. We have some images of other artists that you've shown and your current show. Now I'm assuming the someone else from your stable who is from another country.
Well, he's a young artist who's an American, but originally from North Africa, rsquo, a really important young thinker and visual artist who came to prominence through his photographic work, but has broadened out his discourse into many different areas. And I would say, you know, working in a conceptual vein, very much influenced by David Hammons and Duchamp, and really sort of bringing that tradition of working from his culture in that manner back into the forefront of the conversation. So this exhibition is up right now, and it was conceived of as a presentation about life and death that occurs on a basketball court. So you can see on the floor that we laid out a basketball court, and the conversation is basically conducted on the court.
Wow, especially because the basketball restaurant is near you. Isn't
You know,
I
hadn't thought about that, but that's true. We should have done the party there. Ah, oh, good, Phyllis. Why didn't you phone?
Well, I mean, I'm one of those people who misses Walt Frazier. That's when they were winners. And now here we have another of your fabulous artists.
Yeah, this is Janina Chape, and this is a show that she made in LA for us. That was her first show in LA. Very beautiful show earlier in the year.
And do you miss your son, who's he's running the gallery in LA?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very close to our family is very tight knit, and my daughter and son both work in the gallery, and Lauren works in New York, and Tom moved to open the space in LA. It was very much his initiative, which is, you know, very exciting for him. But I think, you know, these these truisms are always there. They always carry a grain of truth, and, you know, to some extent, I think the son has to kill the father. So instead of slaughtering me, he was very gracious, and he moved to LA and is far enough away from me that he can be his own man without having to bump me off.
And Sean, how do you feel about all of these galleries who have additional galleries in Los Angeles? Is there support out there?
Yeah, there always has been. I mean, I've been going there for over 40 years, but one's always sort of been waiting for the moment to coalesce in some way. And I think it has done quite profoundly now, and will continue to. I mean, for me, you know, I always think the more galleries there are, that just and if they prevail, the more galleries out there the better, because it just means that there's an increased level of interest. Now, people complain about going to museums and having to sort of wait to see the Mona Lisa or queue to see the Vermeers. Well, you know, on some level, yes, but on another level, isn't it wonderful? There's such an extraordinary groundswell of excitement and interest for what we do, you know, culturally, that people want to queue to see a Marina Abramovich installation or a Kusama installation. I just think it's great. I think the more the merrier, frankly.
Totally. And we're ending with Mariko Mori, who is also a part of your gallery. I think it's nice we've shown so many women artists.
Me too. I think my colleagues should step it up a little bit. You know, when we first opened a public space, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, who was too young to have been there then. But when we first opened a public space in 1995, we opened it with an African-American woman. And it never crossed my mind that we were opening a space with a woman or, you know, a woman of color. It was just, we were opening a great show with a great artist, and that was the right thing to do. And that's almost 30 years ago. Now people say, oh my God, you did that 30 years ago? And I go, of course, it doesn't occur to me that that's anything special. It was just a smart thing to do at the time. And it continues, I think it continues to be the smart thing to do, is to show great work from as many different artists as possible, from as many different cultures as possible. Because frankly, it's enriching. And I guess part of my character is that I like to be educated. I like to educate myself. And I'm constantly looking and trying to learn. So, you know, the farther the net, the more I can learn.
Oh my God, this is the perfect place for me to stop. You have been astonishing. Again, if I were an artist, I'd want to show with you.
Well, that's very sweet, but don't talk to my wife because she'd probably disagree with you.
I think we're going to open to Q&A now. And Sean, thank you so much.
No, it's such a pleasure. I mean, it's like you've made it like having a fireside chat with an old friend, so it couldn't be easier.
I know, and we didn't know one another.
Well, we know each other in passing, but I think we need a couple of glasses of something mellow and a cigar or something, you know, by the fireside.
Much. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Sean and Phyllis. This conversation has been amazing, so inspiring and warm. Such amazing work that we've gone through. Thank you. And we do have some questions from the audience. So our first question today is going to be from our friend GE.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. And thank you, Phyllis. I just want to say, too, this is one of my favorite series, these galleries, and especially today. It's like a pinnacle. Thank you. The question is, the gallery seems to have they have such a no boundaries approach to what it presents. The range from the visceral performances to the painting to the sculpture and all the mixed media, and then film. I didn't know about the film. How would you describe the sort of deep DNA of the gallery? And maybe you already did by talking about Joyce and Duchamp, but maybe that's part of it.
Well, yeah, thank you for the question and the compliments. I think it is part of it. I mean, I think the DNA, I guess I ask myself, and I get asked this a lot, I hope that the DNA of the gallery is very much bound up with a deep conceptual practice, a sense of working with language as something visceral, that is alive, that we're trying to change and move forward, cultural language, and contribute to and challenge ourselves with. I think those are the principal strands. So yeah, I mean, I think you can take it back to Joyce and Duchamp quite directly. Of course, the function of a gallery, which we haven't talked about too much, is, you know, we have to sell art. When I was a museum curator in the early 80s, one of the things that I did naturally was to start to build outreach into the community to try and build a real basis for the public institutions I was working with, because I could see their funding being dismantled under Thatcher, and I wanted to provide some underpinning for them. So I did have a sort of commercial hat, if you like, that I went towards. And I got a lot of criticism for it at that time. Now everybody's had to be engaged with it more. So I think that, you know, in moving to be a gallerist, I just had to be more engaged with that side of my personality. But of course, now instead of getting grants and writing applications, we work with collectors who support the artists. But it's still a commercial, we're a commercial operation, and that's how things get done. But we're very fortunate that over the last 4 decades, there have been enough people who've subscribed to that vision, and we found an audience that we are supported, and we're very grateful for that on behalf of the artists.
Wonderful.
So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, GE, for that great question. Our next question today is going to be from Babs. And Babs, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, thank you so much. This was just wonderful to hear all about all these amazing artists that I followed for years. And as an artist myself, this is a bit of a personal question to you, Sean. You've worked with so many of these artists, and obviously when you're collaborating with them for these installations and their works, you're getting involved in the process in a way. And I just wonder, do you, though, ever want to make art? And do you miss that part of yourself? And perhaps you don't think of it that way anymore because you're collaborating with all these people. But at any rate, the question is, do you miss potentially making your own art?
You know, it's such a good question. And I think to some extent I alluded to it earlier, because as I said, you know, the depth of my offense when my tutor told me I was a pretty good artist, but I'd make a great curator, probably came from the fact that I knew that he was right. I think over the years, I've come to understand that, you know, a personality like Marina's or Kehinde's, you know, they have the ability to be in the public eye and to take the slings and arrows of public opinion in a way that I probably would not have been able to do. And I think I'm much better at being the silent collaborator than the face of something. And so I didn't even have to make my peace with it, but I think I am at peace with the fact that my creative act is the collaborative act with the artists. And I get to, you know, the beauty of that is that I get to do it with somebody new every 6 weeks. And I do get a voice every 6 weeks because the artists are very generous and patient with me, and we have those conversations. So I do feel I still have a very strong creative bent, and that the artists are generous enough in the main to indulge it.
Well, I think artists themselves do make great curators and great gallerists. And I've found the ones that I really enjoy going to because they have that wealth of knowledge and they bring that aesthetic, they bring that piece of themselves to each time they're dealing with another artist.
Yeah, and there's a very, very long list of people who were trained as artists who went on to become very good gallerists and good curators and good museum directors too. So it's not atypical.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that great question and for the wonderful answer, Sean. We have one more audience question from Therese, and I will allow you to unmute.
Hi, Sean. Really great talk. As you can hear, I'm a Brit. I'm an expat too. I just wondered about your personal influences and which art schools did you go to? As you mentioned, your tutor such a lot. Thank you.
I went to Cardiff College of Art in Wales.
Right.
And at the time, there were a number of really good people teaching there, including Harry Holland and various other people who went on to to be quite influential in different spheres. So yeah.
Great, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for that question. And that's all of the audience questions we've received. Thanks everyone for questions today. And I'm really excited now to move over to a poetry reading. Here at the Rail, we do have a tradition of ending all of our community events with a reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our Poet Laureate of the Day, Marisa Crawford, to the stage. Marisa Crawford is the author of the poetry collections The Haunted House, Reversible, and most recently Diary. She is the editor of the Weird Sister collection, forthcoming from Feminist Press, and co-editor of We Are the Babysitters Club, essays and artwork from grown-up readers. Marisa is co-host of the 90s rock podcast All Our Pretty Songs, and she lives in New York. Marisa, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Thank you to the Brooklyn Rail. This is such a lovely talk. I'm so happy to be part of it. So I'm going to read a bit from my book Diary that just came out last week. Holy Sonnet. When I moved my bed into the middle of the room, proclaimed I had fallen ill with love's sickness. It didn't last. After a week, moved it back. My best friend hates me. My mom throws 2 sticks of gum in my bag. You buy me a package of 16 glittery butterfly hair clips. You drive the car forward an inch every time I try to get inside. Even your aesthetic is violent. Even your baby in my stomach. Even the way you play the crossword puzzle game and you always win. I've been invisible all day and I want someone to see me. I am nearing the end of how I feel physically. The stairway behind the pool on the south end of the school. Berry stains on my Birkenstocks, how time stopped. You were in my class. I was your teacher, vice versa. You asked me, are you sleeping? And I answered with my eyes closed, no. I'm in St. Patrick's Basilica throwing my Christmas corsage at the Virgin Mary. I put my lipstick on with no hands. I gave a shout out to myself. Diary. I'm wearing my fupa like this because it's part of my outfit. And also I'm wearing 6 necklaces. I'm floating down the stairs. Emily Dickinson poem flanked by ads for Spanx and Neutrogena, tours of haunted Salem homes. Guess I'm doing okay. Had an opportunity but missed it. Ran for the train but missed it. Layering on the non-existent lipstick like I'm going to my first bat mitzvah. Unicorn nail decal. Body dysmorphia like, please. My tits sag, but these aren't my tits. You in black and white. Your boyfriend's 4 fingers. Walking backwards in a field of grass. 1993. I'm at a party. I'm in 7th grade. And I swear by All for One is playing. And I keep saying that I hate it. But really, I love it. And I keep saying that it's a metaphor, but it's not a metaphor. It's a Rorschach, an ink blot on my extra large maxi pad with wings. The wings are a metaphor for freedom. I wanted to be a size 0. I wanted to not exist at all. Selfie in the event of time still rapidly passing. You could come over. It could be the 90s. We could lie outside with sun in our hair. Plastic Easter egg with a 20 in it. Woke up stoked, then killed it. Running outside, listening to Monster Ballads playlist. Jay texts me at the exact first second of Every Rose Has Its Thorn. I'm just going to read one more. Thank you again. Diary. I hate this sweater, but I'm too cold not to wear it as a metaphor for my career. My therapist says, yes, corporations take advantage of human beings' ambitious nature. My insurance says they will cover $0 for our visits. What a thrill. I cut my finger while washing the blender at the exact second that I think of you. We went to the protest. I bought those powder blue shoes with a green alligator on them. Handmaid's Tale jokes at the VMAs, clean versions of songs, picking out baby names for babies that will never be born. You bought the diamond necklace for mom at the mall. You have great taste. You bought it at a store called Accessory Place. Recurring nightmare that I missed the whole summer. Walks I took on my lunch break with Heather. Grunge deaths, being in the dark, nail art. Chris Brown playing on Rihanna Spotify station. I was in the infant toddler room. I was eating peanut butter and banana, fuming with rage at the Galleria. Dee was like, maybe it will be our Vietnam. I'm so sad. No one cares. Tampons with applicators, tampons without applicators. A maxi pad called Always, blasting the car radio. The guy at the McDonald's drive-through who told you your hair was the exact same color as your eyes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisa. That was so wonderful. And a huge, huge thanks again to Sean and Phyllis for the incredible conversation. And thank you also to Brandon and Ellie at Sean Kelly Gallery for helping us so much to prepare for today. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and for supporting our archive, which you can view on our YouTube channel and where this conversation will be posted shortly. For the past 23 years, the Brooklyn Rail has been a platform for the arts, culture, and politics in our free monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support the work we do here at the Rail. And please join us tomorrow at 2 p.m., a special time of 2 p.m., for a conversation with Barbara Kasten and Martha Schwendener on Figure Chair, 1972 to 73 at Bortolami Gallery. We will conclude with a reading by Zoe Bresney. Thanks all for tuning in today, and you can turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. It was wonderful to see you all. Thank you again, Phyllis.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed that
Thank you, everyone.
conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
you.
so
Thank you, Sean.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Wonderful conversations. Thank you,
Thanks.
Sean. Thank you, Phyllis.